Well, and good evening, brothers and sisters. Well, it's your boy BC. Welcome back to another Based LDS video. And it is an exciting weekend, isn't it? I live in South Dakota. I am 5 hours away from the nearest temple in Fort Collins, Colorado. I think it's 6 or 7 to the temple in Montana. So we don't get to the temple as frequently as we should, or used to. My wife especially. When we lived in Denver, it was 40 minutes to the Denver temple, 40 minutes to the Fort Collins temple. So it was nice and simple. And here I am with a channel on LDS stuff, and I'm 5 hours away from a temple, with the biggest breaking news being the changes to the ordinances in the temple, the ceremonies. Tiny minor changes to the baptism, tiny minor changes in the initiatory, and some minor changes, but from the accounts that I've heard, exciting changes to the endowment ceremony. Clearly, what goes on in the temple we don't talk about because these things are sacred. But I don't think it's a problem talking about your experience in the temple, right? This is what we do when we testify. We testify what goes on in the temple. And I have not been there. I do have some in-laws that are temple workers. One of them is a sealer in the Fort Collins temple. They're in the temple so much. They have just the greatest testimony of what goes on in the temple and the work that takes place there. And I called them, and I apparently don't ask quite the right questions because their response was, well, we can't tell you what what's changed. And I'm like, no, I'm not looking for a word for it. I just wonder what your experiences were, what you felt, and everything. Okay. And for them, they are excited and overjoyed by what is happening there. And this is something that's got the LDS internet world abuzz. So I want to touch on it what little I can, because clearly I can't get there and I don't know what my reaction will be. And I'm going to be honest with you. I struggle with the temple. Not like a struggle like I'm losing my faith kind of thing. I have never had the glowing, positive spiritual experience going to the temple. It's just been a thing I go and do. And usually bad things happen to me when I go to the temple. Because that's life and it has to happen to somebody. So all you people can go problem-free. I take your problems upon me by I'm not going to get into it here, but some of them are funny. Most of them are funny in hindsight. But they detract from the spirit and the experience that I should feel when I go. And this bothers my wife quite a bit because she loves the temple. She wants to go as often as she can. I'm always like, yeah, okay. Yeah. And not going to lie, since COVID, I have not been there since COVID. Because it's just, I'm not tied to it the way I am other things. So, and we've talked, and she knows that that's something I'm going to work on changing, and she's very excited that I agreed to go back when we did our youth temple trip, that I wouldn't try and skip out on the youth temple trip, but that we would try and go back in, I forget, April or May for the youth temple trip. So we have to wait until then to see the changes. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what's going to happen in the temple. But where the LDS are excited, you are going to start seeing some rumblings from the non-LDS because they do not understand revelation. They do not understand the principles that the temple was built upon. And so with that, I want to talk for a few minutes on my basic understanding of the temple, focusing mostly on the endowment. And so here we're in just the church website, Temple Endowment. And let's just go over some things here. I have it colored because there's some things I want to touch on to make sure we understand basic principles as we go through. So, Temple Endowment. In 1841, the Lord commanded the saints in Nauvoo to build a temple, that I may reveal mine ordinances therein unto my people. Among these ordinances was a ceremony called the Endowment, which expanded upon the washing and anointing ceremony Joseph had introduced in the Kirtland Temple in 1836. So we may not understand this or know it as a people, but Kirtland Temple was washings and anointings. Baptisms and the endowment ceremony, the sealings, these were to come later through the Nauvoo Temple. So the temple experience has always, for the Latter-day Saints, been one of growth, been one of increased learning and understanding and light over time. Continuing on. Fearing his life would be taken before the temple was completed, Joseph Smith called a handful of men on May 3rd, 1842, to arrange the upper room of his red brick store to represent the interior of a temple as much as the circumstances would permit. The next day, Joseph administered the endowment for the first time to a group of 9 men. During the following 2 years, he gave the endowment to a small group of men and women and instructed and prepared them to officiate in the ordinance so that other worthy saints could receive it when the temple was finished. And from what I understand, that group of 9 men and women was a very select group, and it did not, and I could be wrong, because I'm basing this largely off of what Brother Truman Madsen talked about in his Joseph Smith lectures. Love those lectures. That none of the apostates had been through the temple. None of those who would apostatize later on and participate in the death of Joseph Smith were there. So these were people who were going to be faithful to the end of Joseph's life. And so they recreated the temple experience in the red brick store, that Joseph might pass on this information in case he should die. And we know that was going to happen, right? I don't believe Joseph lived long enough to see any of the ordinances performed in the Nauvoo Temple. So here's Heber C. Kimball talking to Parley Pratt about what the temple experience is. And Heber says this: "We have received some precious things through the prophet on the priesthood that would cause your soul to rejoice. I cannot give them to you on paper, for they are not written." So this is where Heber just says the temple's great. Wait till you experience the temple. And I can't tell you about it. The Spirit constraineth me, so to speak. And then he continues. Then the article continues. In contrast to written scripture, the endowment taught participants by inviting them to symbolically reenact key aspects of the plan of salvation, including the most prominent events of the creative period, the condition of our first parents in the Garden of Eden, their disobedience and consequent expulsion from that blissful abode, their condition in the lone and dreary world when doomed to live by labor and sweat, the plan of redemption by which the great transgression may be atoned. During the course of this reenactment, they covenant to obey God's commandments, commit to devote themselves fully to His work, and acquire knowledge needed to walk back to the presence of the Father. Nibley talks about this a great deal in Temple and Cosmos, maybe a few other spots, because the temple is something Nibley goes back to a lot when he talks about this. But it's all about the temple teaching us what we need to know to pass by the guardian angels, so that we may be invited back into the presence of the Father. And this all stems from the creation, the fall, and the teaching of a Redeemer to Adam and Eve. So in this, we're we are Adam and Eve in this. We're supposed to be symbolically participating as if though we were Adam and Eve. So this is all symbolic, and it's all something we walk through. Now, Joseph Smith never described how the endowment came to be, and there is no recorded revelation outlining its content. However, Willard Richards, who was among the few to receive the endowment from Joseph Smith, testified that the ordinance was governed by the principles of revelation. And that's important. I'm just going to say this slightly, and move on by. The talk that this is just a recreation of the Masonic ordinances and ceremonies is hogwash. I don't doubt there were things there. But Joseph didn't just apply them to apply them. He applied them because revelation. You look into the history, you look into the story, you can draw your own conclusions. This is something I might talk about a little bit later because it's an interesting topic. But it's revelation. What to say, what to do, how to act, what was done, what is covenanted, all revelation. And it can only be. I don't know how you think it's a man-made thing. How this is a construct of a person. Now here's the key we get to when we talk about what's going on now with the temple. So after Joseph Smith introduced the endowment, he directed Brigham Young to organize and systematize all the ceremonies so they could be administered within the temple. At first, the endowment ceremony was preserved only in the memory of the participants. Can you imagine carrying this memory across the plains and throughout the building of all the temples? They did some light work in some temporary facilities, but the focus was always on getting the temple built so they could do the work in the temple. So 1877, when the St. George, Utah temple was completed, Brigham Young directed a small group, including the temple's president, Wilford Woodruff of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, to write down the ceremony to ensure consistency over time and between temples. The St. George, Utah temple was also where the first endowments were performed in behalf of the dead. So, now not the first work, but the first endowments on behalf of the dead were in St. George. So that's a fascinating little fact. But you see this, Joseph sets Brigham Young in charge of the temple ceremonies to protect them, hold them, systematize them, organize them, and so that they can be administered within the temple. And after some time, he gives that responsibility over to Wilford Woodruff. And there's a fascinating book. I do not have the books in storage in Colorado. But it's a fascinating book, a wonderful book, written on Wilford Woodruff and temple development. I forget the name of the book, but when it came out 5 or 6, maybe 7 years ago, I stood in line at Deseret Book. I had 2 copies reserved, one for me and one for my father-in-law. And that's a story for another time. But it is a fantastic book detailing the update and upkeep of the ceremonies in the temple during Wilford Woodruff's lifetime. And we need to understand that the temple is revelation, and revelation is continuous, ongoing, and it's what we need at the time. And changes have been made to the ordinances over time. There's no shame. There's no dishonor in that. Changes have been made because they were necessary. You had to have changes because the needs of the saints had to change. Our requirements. And I love that. I love that revelation is continuously and constantly involved in the temple work. We're not a dead and static church. And then the last part here. Though the endowment's format of symbolic instruction and covenant making has remained the same, it's always that we're walking through and we're in place of. The way the ordinance is administered has changed over time. Originally, the ceremony lasted the better part of a day. Compare that to now. Later generations of church leaders sought divine guidance to streamline the ceremony, making it easier for members to perform vicarious endowments for the dead. The Lord has made sure that we could reach out to everyone across the world, because not everyone has a full day to devote in the temple. You get people that travel for days to get there at great personal cost, expense, and sacrifice. And that maybe going to the temple is a once or twice a lifetime achievement. And so by doing this, by streamlining it, by making the ceremonies shorter, easier, they're able to do more work for their ancestors. It is a blessing that we're still guided by revelation, that we're still cared for and looked after by the Lord in that way. And we're going to see people talking about, oh, they're changing the ceremony to reflect, and they're going to insert blank reason. And just like I actually heard people complaining about the changes to the youth book as far as standards. And these are people that don't understand revelation or policy and doctrine. And it's sad. So I will be searching the internet looking for people to complain and then shooting them down and doing it with you folks. But this is just a quick video because I'm excited for these changes. I'm excited for somebody who always has something bad happen when they go to the temple. I am excited to go and see. Come and see. Come and follow me. Come to my house. Come learn of me. It's beautiful. Great invitation, isn't it? Well, brothers and sisters, that's it for this one. I'm happy to talk about something uplifting with the gospel, something positive, and something so very exciting. I hope you like. I hope you subscribe. I hope you come back for more. I hope you leave comments and tell me what you thought of the ceremony. What was your experience? Without talking about the ceremony, what was your experience? What were your feelings? Anyway, love you. Thank you. Peace out. Have a good day.